You're listening to ABC Radio and Help Me I'm a Comedian. This is a show where we ask a comedian to come in and share an incident or an issue that they struggled with in life and how they got through it. And we ask a psychologist to shine some light on that topic and maybe share some insights that we can all learn from. So you're joined now by psychologist Dr. Rachel Hannam and comedian Sian Smyth. I'm your host, Ashwin Sedkar. A warning up front that this episode does contain references to drug use, sexual abuse, domestic violence and bad language. Sian, can you start by telling us your story?
Well, today I've been asked to come on this podcast to talk about my experience in a nearly 9-year domestic violent relationship, which I was in for the entirety of my 20s and the entirety of the time I've been doing comedy as well. And also to talk about the aftermath of that, which was falling into chronic addiction. I'd always had addiction issues, but then those issues skyrocketed. And I ended up finding myself, as a working girl. I like to use the word prostitute. People say you shouldn't use the word prostitute. You should use the word sex worker. And I'd actually have clients tell me, oh, you should use the word sex worker. You shouldn't use the word prostitute. And it's like, okay, Mr. Virtuous. You know.
Let's start, though, with the relationship, because that seems to be at the core of what got you into that lifestyle. Can you take us into the moment you met and how it evolved into what it became?
We were together, like, really quickly, and it was really intense. It was all the time, every day. Like, I came from, like, a very low socioeconomic town. I was just, like, a kind of, like, rat, I was in, like, the low class at school, and I lived in a small town with a single mum and all that kind of thing. And I moved to Sydney and I met this guy who was, like, really well read and understood, like, about art and comedy and writing, and he didn't wear a wife beater singlet. And I remember thinking for pretty much the whole of the relationship, man, like, I'm so happy I didn't end up with, like, a wife beater as my partner, which is crazy because that's what I was with the whole time. But he just was in disguise, reading Trotsky, and I was like, oh, well, he's fine. That was wrong, And
so even when he was being violent, the image of him in your mind was still a fairly positive one.
That. Yeah.
But it wasn't in reality.
Yeah. And he was very, he was so intelligent and really, like, well-spoken and stuff, and was very much able to articulate, like, the way he controlled me. He was very much able to, like, philosophize it and romanticize it almost in, like, a way, and describe love to me in that way. And actually, I think the smartest thing he ever did was to create the illusion that I was the dominant partner in the relationship, And I thought that up until the very end, until I was sitting in a refuge, like, sitting in a hospital bed even, like, I really thought that I was the dominant partner in the relationship. And he did that by idolizing me. So he'd just, he'd say, like, he loves me more than, like, Gandhi loves India, and more than, like, the Christians love Jerusalem, and, like, really over the top stuff like that. And just, like, explaining, like, just how beautiful it is to just be, really faithful to your partner all the time and that kind of thing. And comment on how, like, other women or other people that we were friends with and, like, their partners talking about, like, guys who they'd been with in the past or past relationships or anything, and how disgusting it was, and how, like, if you really loved someone, you'd never do anything like that. So I took that for word. Well, there was one instance when he put his hands around my neck, and I knew that was bad. And I remember he put his hands around my neck, and I knew he shouldn't have done that. And I said, babe, like, never, ever put your hands around my neck again. And he said he wouldn't. And then it happened again. And then I knew that was really bad. And I went out that night, and then I called I went out that night, and I was like, okay, if he's not sorry about this, by the time I get home, I'm going to stay at my best friend's house. I'm not going to go home to him. And he called me, and he was still furious about what I'd done. And I can't even remember that for the life of me, what I'd done that night. I can't remember why he put his hands around my neck. But, and then he was still furious at me, and I just couldn't believe it. I was like, he has to say sorry for that. Because I remember when I was studying for my degree, it's like 72% of domestic violent relationships that end in homicide, it's due to strangulation. And that is when it's considered high risk. So I was like, okay, this is like, he really shouldn't be doing this. And I just couldn't believe that he wasn't saying sorry. And then I called the DV hotline that night from my friend's house. And they told me to get in an ambulance and go to the hospital. So then they transferred me to a women's domestic violence refuge like the next day. I spent the night in hospital, and then they convinced me somehow. Like I really didn't want to go back. I really wanted to go back home. I was like, oh no, I want to go back home. And then they were like, oh, but maybe you should just like take a few days for like yourself and just like have like a little break from everything and look after yourself. And somehow they must have convinced me to do that, which is very clever. I don't know how they would have done that, but they also made a promise that they wouldn't tell the police. Because of my social work background, I kind of like was a bit on the ball with how to not get him in troubles. And
were you also
I look back on that,
that
and that's crazy. Mm-hmm.
But there's also a hidden reasonableness. Like there's reasons why you did this. And I'm curious, were you also worried about how he would react if the police came knocking on his door? Is that part of it?
Yeah, I was scared about that. And that was terrifying. I didn't know what he would do, or what he would say to them. And I was scared that he'd get me in some kind of trouble as well, but mostly just because I didn't want to betray him, and that felt like a huge betrayal, and it's so interesting though, because I remember the first person I told about it, I didn't even mean to tell him. Like I did not know that was what I'd been experiencing at all. What
do you mean? You didn't think of it as domestic violence?
No, I did not think of it like that. Not until the final weeks, And I remember I called like one of our mutual friends one day because my partner told me he was going to go and jump in front of a train. And so I called our mutual friend and I said, oh, can you go check on him? Because he just told me he's going to jump in front of a train. And my friend was like, yeah, of course. Oh my God, yeah, of course. And I was like, but don't tell him I told you that. And he's like, Sian, I've got to tell you that. I've got to tell him that you told me that. And then it just came out, like it just came out of my mouth, and I said, no, don't, because he might attack me. And I just could not believe that I said that.
Yeah.
Like I felt like I was lying. Like I was like, and then he was just like, oh, Sian. And I just, I did not mean to say that at all, but I felt like there was some sort of vindictiveness in the reason that I said that, or that I was trying to, because he always told me I was trying to get guys' attention. So I always felt like, so I was like, am I just trying to get this guy's attention? No, I wouldn't have said that if it wasn't, I'm sure I wouldn't have said that. And I remember even texting that guy and just being like, I feel like I'm lying, but I don't think I am lying, And, but once I told that guy, and he was like aware of it, I think I became more aware of it as well.
Can you talk then, Rachel, about the impact that secrecy has on a person? Does it make them more ashamed? What impact does secrecy have in general?
Well, we hide these things from ourselves and other people in order not to feel the terrible feeling of shame, and yet through keeping the secret of it, and secrecy is different to privacy. Privacy is conscious, boundaries, knowing who to trust, not to trust. Secrecy is like shame, right? But the secrecy actually fuels shame. So there's that cycle between secrecy and shame. So it sounds like eventually you'd told enough people and you'd gone through enough iterations of this that when that friend said, oh, Sian, somehow you couldn't stay in hiding from yourself anymore.
Yeah. And that guy held my hand through the whole of that, man. Like he was really good. It was.
And that helps with the shame. When you get empathy dissolves the shame away, doesn't it?
Yeah, and he was always very whenever he found out that I told anyone anything about him that wasn't extremely positive, he would lose his shit, absolutely. So I knew that I could not do that as well. I was terrified to do that. So he'd always tell me I was lying. Like very early on in the relationship, he checked my Facebook messages. Like he logged in and checked my Facebook messages, and I've been texting like my sister being like, I think this guy might be a bit controlling and blah, 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 like just like kind of yarning and like being like, I don't know, I think I might still love this guy from high school, and just like, just like teenage young person shit. And he read that and he completely, and he was like, I cannot believe you're telling people that I'm controlling. I'm not controlling. You're controlling. And I just remember after that, I just never said anything ever again. That would have been negative.
Yeah. When we started this conversation, you called yourself a rat and you'd had a working class upbringing. I know you were speaking flippantly and loosely, but in some way, did you have a low opinion of yourself, even at the age of 19? So when you got into this relationship, whatever he told you, you're a manipulator, you're a liar, you were just ready to believe what this powerful person was defining. You were ready to accept other people's definitions of you.
Yeah, I guess so. But it didn't start like that straight away. It started with like, you are incredibly talented and you're so smart.
So he love bombed you.
Oh, to an insane degree. Like to the point where now I don't know like what's normal with like dating and stuff. Like I'm like you're not worshipping me like he did. Like he would worship.
But that's part of the emotional manipulation.
Yeah. And like I remember the second night we like spent together. I remember I remember like they say like, oh, when they tell you they love you too soon, that's a sign. And I remember there was this one, and I always wonder if he was calculated or not. I think he was calculated. Anyway, but I remember there was one night, and it was the second night we'd spent together, and I said, oh, good night. And he said, I love you too. And I was like, I didn't say I love you. And he was like, oh, whoops. And I always thought that story was really funny. And I'd be like, oh my God, like this is like, how funny is that? And he accidentally like just slipped it out. And now I look back on that and I'm like, well, I don't think that was an accident.
That was a bit passive aggressive, wasn't it?
I think that was very like calculated of him to like, like let's see if this works kind of thing. Yeah.
Can you describe how you changed because of this relationship?
By the end, like I was very angry. I was so angry. And I took that out on like other people because I would never take it out on, like never in a million years would I take it out on him. I was extremely angry. I was extremely, unstable. I smoked weed. I'd smoke like $100 worth of weed a day. I was, completely I'd ruin any type of relationships I'd have. I wouldn't, because he wouldn't want me to have them, I was just extremely emotionally, I was emotionally unstable. He was right. Like I was genuinely very emotionally unstable. And I'd get angry. I'd punch my face all the time. Like that was one thing I'd do. I'd just get like so frustrated at like the littlest things. I'd pick up my skin.
So all the anger that you wanted to direct in his direction, but you couldn't, you directed inward to yourself.
Yeah, to myself and to people who I saw as like an easy target as well. That was one thing I noticed that all us girls in the refuge had in common. I was the only one in the arts, but I'd talk to the other girl, but I noticed that two things that we all had in common. So our dad's leaving us and our mums not knowing how to handle when our lives were in a crisis. Because I'd talk to them like they'd say, I've got daddy issues and my mum's a dog. And I think that's their way of saying, like those girls' way of saying that their mums don't know how to handle when their lives are in chaos,
Rachel, I was just asked Sian earlier about how she changed over her 20s and, she talked about getting angry and then after leaving and being hypervigilant. That feels like a lot of damage. Lasting damage you do to a person. Can you talk about the lasting effects of anger and hypervigilance on a person, their body and their mind?
Well, these are trauma responses. So trauma brain is where you are living, as you've said, almost in a constant state of survival mode. But you get so used to it that you don't even realise that it's affecting your thinking, your perceptions. You distort things. And you don't even realise that you're not thinking clearly and you're not seeing clearly. And other people can see. But you minimise, you deny. I mean, this is all those defence mechanisms go into hyperdrive when you've got trauma brain. And in trauma brain, you lose empathy for other people and you lose empathy for yourself.
And I didn't like that I was losing empathy for other people, because I was like, he had no empathy for other people. I don't like, but I couldn't help myself. I really did lose empathy for other people.
Well, you had trauma brain.
And but it's so funny because I was also kind of aware. Like I remember being like, I feel like like when I was growing up, my mum would foster children. We'd have foster kids. And I was like, I feel like those foster kids. Like that's how I feel like I know how they felt growing up. But this is how I feel. Like I started calling people dogs, and like I started being like, you fucking dog, like blah, blah, blah. Like I started listening to like 1/4 loudly on the train without any, headphones, like Australian drill rap.
Being obnoxious.
Yeah, and just being like, well, this is what I fucking want to do,
But you didn't like being like that, really, did you?
No, but I just felt, I don't know, and then I remember, I was aware of it. I was like, but I couldn't help it, and I felt entitled in a way to behave like that. And, and I remember, like, it must have been so obvious how traumatized I looked. And I remember being kicked out of a venue one night because I was traumatized and they thought I was drunk. I actually wasn't, for once. And they kicked me out for being traumatized. And I remember I lost it at this bounce.
So trauma brain, you've lost empathy, which means you're going to get much more reactive, entitled, like you said, or aggressive. I mean, and when you look back, tell me if you disagree, but it's a horrible way to be.
Yeah. And
it's not your true self.
Yeah,
it's very out of character.
People away,
and it pushes people away.
And I lost friends. Like people, it's not like I lost friends, but I was too intense for them. Yeah. But I felt very entitled to them. I was like, well, I've just been through what the fuck? Like, be on my fucking side,
It's because you didn't have much empathy at that time.
Yeah.
That's because you had trauma brain.
Yeah. And I didn't know how to, and I was so hurt by that. I was really unbelievably hurt by that because I felt like at this point, I didn't deserve to be lonely because of what had happened to me. And, and looking back, I understand that it's difficult and it's uncomfortable. And my friends actually showed me the most amount of love that they could possibly show me. And it would have just never been enough to stop that pain at all. Never, not in a million years. But I somehow thought that they could. And then I was being like really intense all the time. And like they couldn't handle it. And that is fair enough. They do not have a degree in that shit, they're comedians and they're, working in marketing. Like they don't know like how to react. And they did their best job they possibly could. And I look back and I am very grateful for the ways they did react because thankfully, a lot of them were very left wing and were very, progressive and for women's rights and wanted to like hear me out. But, there came a point, I think, and I was getting, too full on.
Deep down when you're looking for acknowledgement, empathy.
Yeah, acknowledgement and empathy. And people, like, they did acknowledge me, but it wasn't, none of it felt like enough, You
were starving for it.
Yeah. And eventually it was just going on deaf ears, and that upset me. And then and then my drug use just became really, really bad and I started doing prostitution,
You're listening to Help Me, I'm a Comedian on ABC Radio. I'm here with comedian Sian Smyth and psychologist Dr. Rachel Hannam. I'm Ashwin Sekar. We've just been hearing Sian's story about a domestic violence relationship. Things have ended very well for Sian recently. I'm on your Facebook friend. I see how positive things are going for you now. Can you tell us about how you ended up moving from that into addiction to meth and prostitution?
So then that, and I got addicted to Xanax, actually. So I was so entitled to Xanax. I was like, it should be the law that I get Xanax because of what I've been through, and I just abused them like nothing else. I took like 17 milligrams of Xanax a day, which is fucking ridiculous.
That's a sleeping pill, is it?
It's a benzodiazepine.
It's an anti-anxiety.
But stronger than Valium kind of thing. Right. And anyway, I remember I ran out of my packet one day and I was sitting in the middle of the Sydney CBD and I was just like, I'm not leaving this fucking CBD until I've sucked dick for money and I can go and get a bottle of Xanax after this. And you know what? It is surprisingly a lot easier to do that than what you would ever think. And I did suck dick for money that night. And I did have enough money to buy another bottle of Xanax. And
did you have to sort of manipulate the doctors to get all of that Xanax?
No, I got it off dealers. I had no sexual boundaries, like, at all. Right. And it's something I still struggle with now, I think, because, like, all my sexual boundaries have been completely broken.
Yeah.
And, so that was one. Yeah, and I didn't care about that shit. That shit just did not affect. And when you're on Xanax, you don't even care about it as much because you've lost all your inhibitions. And I saw it as a way that I could like be with people all the time. That's also, which is hard for me to like, admit, because that sounds like really pathetic, and but it was like a way to conquer that loneliness and the friendships that I was kind of lacking at the time because people couldn't handle me. And that was one way that I could gain that back, and I could be with someone every night and be adored or whatever else, even if it's not in the healthiest way. It was just trying to find that again as well, and I liked it about that I was with people all the time when I was doing that.
Were you doing this by yourself, or had you joined a brothel? How did that work?
Oh, yeah, I was working at a brothel. Yeah. So I was doing it that way, and then and then doing privates. I can't really remember all of it, but yeah, I was doing most of it at a brothel, and yeah, I liked the attention. I had no sexual boundaries, and I got a heap of money, and then I started doing meth there, and then that made everything so much better.
Until it didn't.
Yeah, until it didn't anymore. And the minute I had meth, I was absolutely obsessed with it. The guy that ran the brothel actually sold the meth, so he'd just take it out of our pays at the end of the night, which is really unethical. It is very unethical for this brothel owner to, so yeah, and that just made working really easy. It made the loneliness easier to handle, and I was also with people all the time, and I actually really liked that. And it's so interesting, I remember the last sex buyer I ever saw or client I ever saw, I remember I said to him, I'd smoked 6 points in one night, which is crazy. People smoke 1 point over 3 days. I wanted to kill something that night. I was unfathomably lonely, and I just smoked all this meth. And I remember this guy came in, and he said, he was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "I have a meth problem." And he was like, "I have a sex addiction problem." And I said, "Okay, well, maybe after this, I should go to a Narcotics Anonymous meeting, a 12-step meeting, and you should go to a Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous meeting." And, I didn't even fuck him that night. I just hugged him, and he said to me, "It's because I'm lonely." And I was like, "Yeah, it's because I'm lonely too."
Can you take us into that lifestyle? Did you adapt to it really easily, to working in the brothel and having the meth addiction, or was there parts of it that you were quite challenging and that you never really got used to?
Yeah, I actually think I fell into it a lot easier than what you'd have them. I found it really easy, but my intentions behind it were not good. And I remember there was one time, and I was smoking crack on the floor of the brothel with this other working girl, and she was like, "Oh, I'm a DV survivor too." And I just had this bird's eye view, and I was like, "Oh, Sian, this is such a fucking stereotype. You really, this is too fucking sad. 2 fucking DV victims now, selling their bodies in a brothel, smoking meth, And I remember then I booked my flight to Brisbane and moved here.
It's almost the thing that
at
got
that
you
moment.
up.
You did that in that moment.
Yeah. At the brothel. Yeah.
I was going to ask you what your turning point was, but that's such a comedian's brain to go, "Oh, this is so hack."
Yeah.
that's what got you up. The comedian's aversion to hackness.
No, but I did. No, so yeah, and then I moved to Brisbane. I was here for a few months. I was still very unwell. I was coming off meth. I was still just completely unwell. So I went back to Sydney, relapsed into prostitution and meth for 10 days, then came back, then got clean and stayed clean ever since. So, yeah, that was kind of what I couldn't handle it. I couldn't handle that for a little while. So, yeah, I couldn't handle first moving to Brisbane and, being unwell, and then also having to, make new friends and all that sort of shit. I found, it was impossible to make new friends. I couldn't even keep my old friends. I was just but it's gotten so much better now, and I'm so grateful every single day. It's so much better, and I have these beautiful connections that I've got, and it's only because I've been clean and sober, and because it's just taken time as well, not being obsessed with what had happened to me and not bringing it up all the time and not letting it weigh down every single conversation that people have with me by bringing that up. And
did you go see someone? Did you get a therapist or a counsellor?
I got counselling through Victims of Crime. You get free counselling through them. But I didn't really align with that as much as I did. I really just did the most work with just working, with just connecting with other recovering addicts who were trying not to use. And just applying the 12 steps of recovery to my life, and having, close connections there. That's where I've found the most healing.
Support, yeah.
And having those 12 steps is then I apply them. I try and practice those principles in all my affairs.
Could you maybe summarise some of the key principles? Why did the program work for you is what I'm getting at.
Healthy connection. That is the most important thing. Oh my God. Like that connection has just, so the connection has helped me the most. Having, a program to work on so that it filled up every single day, having this program, because it's a program that you use every single day of your life until you die. That's basically it. So I had started to have structured days. I started to, hang out with, we had a certain time that all us recovering addicts would meet. It was midday. And we met together every weekday at this time, and I structured my whole life around this meeting. And then so that built structure into my life, was being a part of this, and then getting more and more into that community, learning how to socialize again with people who would also accept me while I was broken. I remember the first time walking into and meeting these other recovering addicts. I remember the first time, and I'd just come off the plane from that massive meth binge and prostitution binge. And I remember I went in there and I was crying and I was late. And they said, how long have you not been using for? And I said 24 hours. And I was so ashamed. And then the whole room clapped. And I was like, oh my God. And then, it wrapped up, and then people were like, wanted to make sure I wasn't homeless and all that kind of thing. And they just completely loved me in the exact way. I don't know how they did that. They were just able to love me in the exact way I needed to be loved at that time. And they just accepted me while I was broken, and accepted me. And they were all I had for like a couple of months. And then eventually I have so much more than that. And they taught me everything. Like I was able to socialize again. I was able to do everything. And once you, involve your whole life with this community, you just, and apply the principles that they tell you. Like the principles apply to not using drugs, but they also apply to just how you interact with people and how we can be friends again, and how all that kind of thing. And we're all so similar, and we're each other's people. Like they are just my people.
We've all got different poisonous mushrooms inside us. And
What's your poisonous mushroom, Ashwin?
For me, it's, I think, not saying hard truths. Like sometimes I want to avoid conflict, which is similar to what we talked about with Mel. So to avoid conflict, I don't say difficult things sometimes, and that makes life worse. Because you didn't tell that's enough of that story when you just said to that comedian that other night. I wouldn't have said that's enough of that story. So you get to extricate yourself from a difficult situation. Sometimes I stay in that difficult situation because I don't say what needs to be said. So I think that's my poison mushroom.
Right.
Wanting to keep the peace at all costs.
Yeah. Yeah. What's yours, Rachel?
I relate to some of this. I haven't had a meth addiction. But, that dopaminergic brain, the brain that chases the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And
Sian, just before we let you go, can you tell us how your life is going now and what you're up to? Yeah,
well, I'm always awaiting tragedy. I know might be behind I know we're probably on the verge of a nuclear war, but it's very good at the moment. I'm very grateful. I'm working on a lot of cool projects. I'm going to be touring my new hour around, which I invite all your listeners to come to. So you can follow me on social media.
Sian Smyth and Rachel Hannam, thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Ashwin.
Thank you.
You've been listening to comedian Sian Smyth and psychologist Dr. Rachel Hannam. I'm your host, Ashwin Sedkar. If there's anything in this episode that distressed you and you need to seek some help, please do call Lifeline on 13 11 14. And for domestic violence, you can call 1-800-RESPECT, 1-800-737-732.